As we have been telling you for 2 days now, much of the investigation into the attacks is focusing on Osama bin Laden, a terrorist leader who has been monitored for years, and yet he remains a confounding and deeply enigmatic figure to so many, cold-blooded and calculating. With more on the mind of bin Laden, here's Dateline's Jane Pauley tonight. Jane?
Well, thanks, Tom. The one thing you may think you know for sure about the hideous atrocities wreaked upon this country yesterday is that it had to have been the work of madmen. Who else could conceive of a plot to kill so many innocent people, or to execute that plan by deliberately immolating yourself along with them in the fiery crash? But it could be a big mistake to underestimate the likes of such men as Osama bin Laden.
I don't think he's crazy. He is devious, he is clever, he is relentless, and he is patient.
But he is not a madman.
But he is not a madman.
Judith Miller is a reporter for the New York Times. She's covered the Arab world since 1983, when she was chief of the Times Cairo bureau. Is calling this even fanaticism too simplistic?
Fanatic is actually a very good word to describe them. They are highly motivated, they are highly disciplined, and we underestimate them at our peril.
Understanding them is critical, too. What would motivate a young man, average age of a suicide bomber is 22, to sacrifice his life as an unknown number did yesterday?
I think despair is partly responsible for this wave of suicide bombings.
Because they have nowhere else.
Because they have nowhere else to go. I mean, I have interviewed so many of these young people with so much hope for the future and so few prospects.
Especially the educated ones.
Especially the educated ones.
Dr. Gerald Post is a professor of political psychology at George Washington University. He's also a psychiatrist.
These people are distinctly not psychologically disturbed. In fact, interestingly, psychiatrically disturbed individuals are expelled from the groups because they're considered a security risk.
Many say it's a perversion of Islam, that the Quran condemns suicide. But radical Islamic sects do not call it suicide. In their interpretation, not to act is immoral.
The motivation for these acts is both religious and social. And the social motivation is a fusion of nationalism and radical Islam.
What did America do to unleash this hell upon us?
Well, according to Osama bin Laden, we defiled sacred Saudi and Islamic soil.
When?
In 1990 and 91, when we sent American and international troops to defend his country against Iraqi soldiers.
Just as the Soviets had defiled Islamic soil in Afghanistan in 1979. Financed in part by his money, the Mujahideen then drove the Soviets out. He needed an enemy.
But he needed an enemy, precisely, and he also had an enemy because the Palestinian people were being, quote, oppressed. And it was the duty of all Muslims to come and rescue them. And the Arab countries were being, quote, oppressed by autocratic, horrible rulers whose rule he also wanted to terminate. And he felt that by mobilizing and training Arabs all over the world and Muslims from all over the world, he could accomplish this.
Bin Laden and other radical factions of Islam frighten many in the Arab world, too. They may not represent mainstream Muslims, but they are determined and well-financed. But Judith Miller argues that to persist in seeing them as crazy fanatics is dangerous.
We have to get rid of this image of these people as kind of wild-eyed fanatics who are disorganized and can't get their act together.
Why do we have to?
I think if we don't discard these images and stereotypes, we will underestimate the enemy.
What is it about the American psyche that may be undermining our own interests?
I think sometimes any democracy is ill-equipped because we are open. That is our trademark. We are ill-equipped to fight people who are looking constantly for our weaknesses, for our vulnerabilities, for ways in which we can be hurt.
And joining us now from Washington is former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. Madam Secretary, the Clinton administration was so successful in arranging peace for Bosnia and executing an air war against Kosovo, but does it now seem clear to you that you greatly underestimated the threat of terrorism in this country, particularly Osama bin Laden?
I don't think we underestimated it, Tom. I think we understood the difficulty of it. We were clearly under threat. I had a lot of wonderful days as Secretary of State, but my worst day was when those embassies went down in Kenya and Tanzania. We worked to deal with it as best we could, and I think that what it will require is incredible determination now to deal with the issue beyond what we were able to do internationally. And I must say that I'm very supportive of what President Bush and Secretary Powell are doing in getting support for international action.
But should you have begun that international action at that time? There were two retaliatory strikes, one in Sudan, one in the subcontinent. Some question about the appropriateness of the target in the Sudan.
Well, first of all, I think that we did everything that we could. I believe we did the right thing in the target in Sudan. And this is a very different proposition. America itself has been attacked on our own soil, and it is unfortunate that it takes this kind of a horrific act to get people mobilized. I have no question that we did what we could, and we need to support this administration now in doing what it can. And the determination that Judith Miller talks about that the terrorists have, we have to have the same determination. And I have very much been following and read your book and everything that has been talked about in terms of the generation that saved us from the scourge of the evil of World War II. And we now have to exhibit the same bravery that those people did.
Madam Secretary, I do think that it's fair to say that there was not much political will in either party during the Clinton administration to commit the resources that were going to be required, diplomatic, militarily, and economic, to fight terrorism. But let's now try to go forward from here if we can. What are the greatest challenges to the administration in building this international coalition of allies? Are they the moderate Arab states?
Well, I think that clearly there is a question how they will behave. And I think that they are in a difficult position since there are extremists within their ranks and that they are concerned about. But they have to understand that they are just as much threatened by terrorism as the rest of us are. And I think, as Senator Biden said, it is important now for countries to make clear where they stand. We are all threatened by this, and I think we have to be very careful not to just decide that all Arab countries or Islam is responsible for this. This is a group of determined extremists who have their own agenda.
There was such a great deterioration of the situation in Israel before all of this happened. Is there any hope whatsoever for the peace process there?
Well, ultimately, it is the only way that we're going to be able to deal with this. And I am so regretful that we were not able to bring that peace process to a useful conclusion during our time. I think that we cannot live in a world where this kind of terrorism is possible and where we don't continue to have hope and peace. This has been a terrible day where we have really all had to and willingly identify with the victims and their families. And America has to stand tall. We have to remain calm. We have to be determined, and we have to bring allies and friends along. But ultimately, this is our responsibility. America was hit.
Thank you so much, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. Thanks for joining us tonight, Madam Secretary.
You.
And joining us now is NBC's Campbell Brown. She's at the White House. She has more on the options that are being considered there. But Campbell, it's pretty clear tonight that President George Bush the 43rd is using the model of President George Bush the 41st in building a strong international coalition before any military options are executed.
Absolutely, Tom. They're being very careful not to talk about specific retaliatory options, but we are seeing a strategy emerge from these national security meetings the president is having. And what national security sources say is that's really their only option right now in terms of immediate action they can take to focus on trying to build support in the international community for whatever course of action the president chooses. The president today, we heard that in his remarks, as he defined this as really an attack on the world. And White House officials have been quick to point out the constant contact he's been having with world leaders. He spoke twice today with Russian President Putin, speaking with President Zhang. He's been in close contact with British Prime Minister Tony Blair and Canadian Prime Minister Chrétien. But what's interesting, Tom, based on the information we've been given about who the president's in contact with, he has not reached out directly yet to leaders in the Arab world. And we have heard him make some not-so-veiled threats to countries who may be harboring these terrorists, but we're also seeing a recognition from the White House that there is only so much that they can do unilaterally, that there really does have to be support from the rest of the world. Tom?
And Campbell Brown, what about the president's agenda in the short term? He's got some major foreign policy meetings that are coming up both in Washington and international economic meeting, and then he's going to be on the road come October.
You're right, and there have been a lot of questions raised about how this affects the president's schedule. He has a huge trip to Asia planned for the end of October. Will he still go on that trip? For right now, what the White House is telling us is that his immediate schedule, given the crisis situation, is on hold, that this is really his top priority. And a few domestic trips have been canceled. But as of right now, he is still planning to go to New York for when the UN General Assembly opens. He also wants to make a trip to New York to the site to visit with rescue and recovery workers there. And for now, they are saying that at least nothing is canceled as of yet. They're going to wait and see how this plays out.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. It's an image that will be impossible for any of us to forget for a long, long time, if ever. New Yorkers rushing out of flaming buildings as firefighters and other rescue workers rushed in. Then the Twin Towers collapsed. That's the sight tonight. And now New York's bravest are searching for hundreds of their own, as well as the thousands who are believed to have been in the building when those Twin Towers came down. Tonight, Dateline's Dawn Fratangelo has some of their stories.
The date, September 11th, 9/11, will forever be etched in our minds. It's eerie to think that hundreds of people were probably dialing that date, 911, after the first plane slammed into the World Trade Center. And when those 911 calls started pouring in, New York's firefighters and police couldn't stand around in shock like millions of other New Yorkers.
You guys going back? Yes. It's our job.
They had a job to do, a job that would cost many of New York's finest and bravest their lives.
Every company across the city has lost somebody. It's hard. It's hard.
As the towers were burning, hundreds of firefighters and police were sent into the buildings. The firefighters were from some of the city's most elite rescue units, teams of 6 who were specially trained in building collapses. While thousands of panicked office workers were running down the stairs, hundreds of firefighters were running up.
I guess it was about the 27th floor. The firemen started coming up into the building. And I just felt that they were very brave, and you know, we were kind of clapping for them and wishing them luck on their way in.
But they were not so lucky. As the rescuers tried to save more people, the towers collapsed. First one, and about 40 minutes later, the other crashed to the ground.
Are you thinking of the firemen because you fear that they were perhaps trapped in the building when it collapsed?
I think they probably were. I think there were a lot of them that did get trapped in there, and I think that's very sad. They were all nice, young, healthy, good-looking guys.
And it wasn't just the rescuers on the inside. As the cloud of debris rained down, it destroyed a command center where 2 of the fire department's top commanders were stationed.
I don't know what to say. We lost people that have given over 40 years.
Our job was never meant to be like this. This is something that nobody would ever figure could happen or would happen.
By late last night, as firefighters continued to battle fires and search the rubble, the numbers were staggering.
We've got over 300 people that